Good evening and welcome back to the Safe Space with Bobo Nene. Last time we were together, we began our journey with denial, looking at denial not as weakness but as God's cushion of grace, a pause that allows our heart to breathe before we face the weight of reality. We saw that denial whispers, "Not yet," giving us space to function when we would otherwise collapse. But today, we go a step deeper. If denial is the surface, what lies beneath it? What fuels its grip on us? Because denial does not appear out of nowhere. It has a root. And if we are going to walk with grace through grief, we cannot only name denial. We must understand what keeps us there. Today, in Denial Part 2, we are going to gently uncover the root causes of denial, not to shame them, but to shine the light of God's grace on them. Because whatever is exposed to His light can be healed. So therefore, what is the root cause or root causes of denial? Denial can be rooted in disappointment and shame. Sometimes denial grows out of our disappointments of the dreams that we had, dreams that were never fulfilled, plans that never materialized, our expectations that death suddenly and brutally cut short. That disappointment can make reality unbearable. So denial steps in as a buffer to softening the blow. Then there is shame. In some cultures and communities, widowhood carries a heavy stigma. Shame may show up as an internal tug of war between how you are expected to grieve and how you truly feel inside. Instead of grieving freely, you sometimes bury it inside. You pretend. You deny. Not because you do not care, but because you are trying to protect yourself in a world that does not always make space for your truth. Grace, however, reminds us God does not shame you for your pain. He meets you in it. God does not shame you for your pain, but He meets you in your pain. The second root cause of denial is unfinished business. The weight of what was left unsaid sometimes. Grief is really neat. Grief sometimes is so untidy. It is not neat. And neither are relationships. Sometimes what makes it hardest to accept the loss of those that we loved is what was left undone, unsaid. Maybe you were in the middle of a disagreement with your husband or your spouse. Or maybe you assumed that there would be more time later to talk things through, to forgive one another, to dream together again. But now, latter will never come. When there is unfinished business, denial often becomes a shield, convincing us that the story is not really over. Denial shows up when the chapters ended too soon and your heart needs time to make space with what was left unsaid. Grace, however, gently enters that unfinished space, that unfinished business, not to erase it, but to help you find healing even in the fragments of unfinished stories. The third root cause of denial can sometimes be unfair in-law dynamics. For many widows, the pain of loss is made heavier by complicated family dynamics, especially with in-laws. In some marriages, a husband quietly stands as a bridge between his wife and his family of origin. But what happens when that bridge is suddenly gone? If you were never fully accepted as their bride, for example, or if your role as a wife was overshadowed by competing loyalties, then widowhood can feel like an avalanche of rejection. Denial in this case may show up as a quiet rebellion, as though clinging to the marriage in memory keeps the bond alive when the world refuses to acknowledge your space. Grace and God's grace steps in here to remind you your identity is not erased. Your worth is not diminished. And your role as a beloved daughter of the Most High God cannot be denied. The fourth root cause of denial, it is when the life you knew disappears. When your husband dies, it is not just the person you lose. It is the life you built together. For many widows, especially when the husband was the primary breadwinner, the loss goes beyond emotional. It affects finances, it affects their social standing, and even a sense of belonging. You may lose certain friends or access to spaces that were once open because of your husband's position, your husband's career, or your husband's community ties. You were not only his wife, you were a part of a partnership, a rhythm, a way of life. Now that rhythm is gone, and you may feel like a stranger in your own life story. Denial in such cases is not just about the absence of a person. It is about the collapse of a world you thought was secure. And grace whispers during this time, though your world has shifted, your God has not moved. He is still your anchor, your provider, your safe space. And therefore, during this moment, it is so important that you get to know him just a little bit deeper. So, as we peel back these root causes, disappointment, shame, unfinished business, strained family ties, and the collapse of a shared life, we begin to see why denial feels so powerful sometimes, why it holds us so tightly. But here is the good news. No matter what the root may be, grace is greater. And just as God met Daniel in the lion's den, he meets us in hidden dens of our grief, carrying us towards healing. You know, Daniel's story in the lion's den in Daniel 6 is not just a story about a man surviving a night with wild animals. It is about God's presence in the most dangerous, frightening, and impossible place. Daniel had done nothing wrong. His only crime was his faithfulness to his God. Yet because of jealousy and unjust laws, he was thrown into a pit where death seemed certain. But here is a miracle. Daniel was not alone in the den. The scripture says that God sent his angel, and the lion's mouth was shut. We find that in Daniel 6 verse 22. In other words, God's presence entered Daniel's place of fear, of danger, and despair, and turned it into a place of protection and testimony. Widowhood, grief, especially denial, can feel like a lion's den. The lions in your journey of grief are the emotions that threaten to overcome you. Fear, regret, shame, anger, loneliness. The den is that dark space where you feel trapped, misunderstood, or powerless. Just like Daniel, you may not have chosen to be thrown into the journey of grief. You did not choose widowhood status, the journey of loss, the pain, the rejection, or the disappointment. Yet you are here now. But just as God did not abandon Daniel in the lion's den, he will not abandon you in your den of grief. His presence still comes in, even in the raw places of denial. Grace shows up not to condemn you for feeling stuck, but to protect your heart while you are not ready to face the full weight of reality of death. The lions did not disappear for Daniel. They were still there, but their power was neutralized. In the same way, your grief, your questions, and your struggles may still be present, but grace keeps them from destroying you. So when I say, just as God met Daniel in the lion's den, I am reminding you that no matter how dark or overwhelming your grief may feel, you are not alone in that space. God's presence steps in. His grace covers you, and what was meant to devour you will not destroy you. Instead, your lion's den can become your testimony of his faithfulness. Let's take time and reflect. What expectation of God's love were shattered in your grief? How might you begin to rebuild a more honest relationship with him? The reason I am asking you to step back and reflect is because for me, denial was not a weekend or a month or even a season thing. It stretched over 2 long years. And when reality finally broke through, it shook the very foundation of what I thought I knew about God and his love. I wrestled with a question that I know many widows silently ask. How could a loving God let this happen? People kept speaking about his love to me, but to me, it felt like empty words. I could not reconcile the idea of a God who cares with the heartbreak of losing my husband so suddenly. What made it sting even more was the timing. Just weeks before his death, I had made a huge spiritual step. I had visited a church and I was warming up, to the love of Christ. It felt like a fresh start, like I was stepping into a new chapter filled with promises. And then out of nowhere, 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, my husband was gone. It felt like betrayal, as though God had set me up for heartbreak. I remember thinking, did you trick me, Lord? And yet, the same church I visited, they were the first ones, to be at my home. The very same church where I heard the good news about Christ. They were the very first. They became my lifeline. They prayed with me. They stood by me. They tried to pour God's love into me, but I could not feel it. My grief and my denial had built a wall, and behind that wall, my anger towards God grew louder and louder. The promises from our premarital counseling session kept haunting me. We had been told that marriage was God's design, that he loves families and wants them to thrive. So why would he allow mine to collapse so quickly? I kept asking this question. God, how can you say you love families and let mine fall apart? I now see something I could not see then. My grief distorted my vision of who God really is. I confused my pain with his absence. But even in those moments when I was angry, questioning and blaming God, God was not far. He was right there, patient, understanding, and waiting for me to heal and to take a turn. The turning point came the day I stopped pretending to be strong. The day I gave myself permission to fall apart. That was the moment grace rushed in, not to erase the pain, but to hold me in it. Today I see more clearly. Denial was not my failure. It was my survival. And revelation came when I realized that God's love never abandoned me. Instead, it carried me, even when I did not want it. When I look back now, I realize that my 2 years of denial were my own lion's den. Like Daniel, I did not choose that pit. I was thrown in by loss, confusion, and heartbreak. The lions around me were not animals, but questions, anger, shame, despair. And just like Daniel, I thought I was alone in the dark place. But here is the truth. God stepped into that den with me. His presence did not remove the lions right away, but his grace kept their power from destroying me. And just like Daniel walked out of the den alive, I walked out of my denial with a deeper understanding that God's love was never absent. It was carrying me all along. So hear me today. Daniel and me were in the lion's den. Denial may feel like your lion's den today, but grace is the angel that shuts the lion's mouth. You will not be devoured. You will be delivered instead. Thank you for joining me today once again. I invite you to take time for reflection as part of your healing journey. Be sure to subscribe, share this podcast with someone walking through widowhood, and join us next time as we continue together. Goodbye, and remember, let grace step in every stage of your journey.